Okay, so can I welcome members, our invited guests, members of the public here and watching on the webcast to today's meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. Our main item of business today is our monthly question and answer session with the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. First, we have a few short items of formal business to go through before we get to our guests, though. Members of the public can follow us on Twitter at London Assembly and take part in the discussion using the hashtag #AssemblyPolice. Please can you all make sure that you've got your phones on silent before we start the meeting, including everybody upstairs as well. So item 1 is apologies. Can I ask our clerk, Teresa Young, if we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from the Chairman, Steve O'Connell, and Assembly Member Prince is substituting for him today. Also, Assembly Member Dismore and Assembly Member Shalomi and Assembly Member Dr Sahota is substituting for her today. And also apologies for lateness from Assembly Member Whittle.
Thank you very much. Item 2 is declarations of interests. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests?
Noted.
Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the Police and Crime Committee meeting on 20th of September to be signed by me as a correct record? Great. Thank you. And item 4 is summary list of actions. Can I ask the committee to note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the committee? Thank you. Item 5, action taken under delegated authority. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by the Chair under delegated authority following consultation with party groups and Caroline Pigeon AM to agree the committee's response to the MOPAC and MPS access and public engagement strategy? Thank you. Item 6 then. So we now have our question and answer session with MOPAC and the police. Can I welcome our guests? We have Sophie Linden, the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime, Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis, and Craig O'Mackie, the Deputy Commissioner of the MPS. Right, so I'll start with the first question, and this is about crime rates. We've just received an overview of the changes in crime over the past year, and they're quite worrying. There's a lot of red in our table that shows crime across most areas is going up. So can I ask the Commissioner, crime was generally falling across London until 2015, but we're now seeing this rise. How are you going to get it back down again?
So, thank you very much, Chair, and good morning. Yes, you're right. Crime in general was reducing in London and indeed nationally for several years. And it does appear that over the last year to 18 months, it has begun to rise again. London is not alone in this. This is a national trend as well, and indeed in some respects, actually nationally, certain crimes appear to be rising faster than outside London than inside London. I'm particularly concerned, as you know, about what I would call, the highest harm crimes, the rises in violence, and that includes gun crime, it includes knife crime, and of course, sadly, because of that, it includes homicides. We also have a significant rise in personal robbery, and I know that later on we're going to focus probably on the issue of scooter-enabled crime, so I won't dwell on that here. Important to note, though, that in many categories, let me take robbery for a second. Robbery is up considerably, as you can see from your tables, personal robbery, but it is still a considerable chunk below where it was 5 years ago. And we have to put this in context, I think. There is a rise, but London remains a safe city, and in many, many respects safer than it was 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. I have prioritised violent crime, as you know, as the thing that I'm most concerned about, and we are making huge efforts against, for example, knife crime, and we've talked to the committee about that in the past. We are beginning to see some reduction, I think, in the rate of rise, if you like, in both scooter-enabled crime, in knife crime affecting our young people, people injured under the age of 25, and indeed in terms of lethal barreled discharges. And this is a coordinated approach across all aspects, trying to prevent crime, ensuring that we have good intelligence, ensuring that we lock people up wherever we can and they need locking up, and taking all the kind of protective measures that we possibly can to stop people from becoming victims. But I'm not going to hide from this. It is a challenging issue, and it comes at a time where we are seeing a huge increase in our emergency calls, where, as you know, in the longer run, London is getting larger and younger, and we know that a younger population tends to be one which is more prone to being a victim of crime and indeed potentially offenders. And we are doing all this against the backdrop of reducing resources and, of course, the threat from terrorism. And a lot of the crimes that people are now most concerned about, for example, sexual exploitation of children, online crime, human slavery, we'll talk about in the agenda. These are all very complex issues and complex crimes that take a lot of effort to investigate.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure members will have follow-up questions, but I wanted to ask, before we move on to that, about the reports this week in the newspapers about the crime assessment policy. In other words, the prioritisation of investigations on certain crimes and not others. This is something we weren't really aware about, although obviously we're aware that officers in their daily lives have to prioritise what they investigate. We weren't aware that there was a written down policy. So I wanted to ask two things about that. First of all, is it a good idea to have this policy in a written down way? I think most of the newspapers have gone for the angle that this is a written charter for thieves. It is something that people can refer to when deciding which crimes to do, and I think that's potentially the danger of having the policy in the first place. So is that wise? And secondly, does it contradict some of the things we heard when we were investigating antisocial behaviour recently? We had some very good discussions about how the dedicated ward officers would be able to spend more time looking into complex problems of antisocial behaviour that don't potentially make the grade of crime at all. Are those two things? How do those two things match up in terms of having this prioritisation?
Thank you. Well, the first thing is, I do think it is a good thing. Clearly, this is not about letting criminals get away with it or not investigating crimes that at the moment we would solve. If it was that, we wouldn't be doing it. We are doing something which is actually not dissimilar either from what is happening nationally in many other police services, and you'll have seen some coverage of that, or indeed, as you indicated in your question, from what we have always done. What we are doing is giving our officers some greater clarity to help them when they are using their discretion, and they do still have discretion, to make decisions about when it will not be sensible to continue to investigate. Because we know from all our research that given whatever factor it may be, they are very, 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 very unlikely to be able to bring somebody to justice or get some other positive outcome from that particular crime. So as you say, we have always prioritised. Nobody would have ever expected us to put the same amount of effort into investigating a burglary as into, if I give Craig a slap now. Well, mind you, that might result in an enormous investigation by somebody else, apologies. But you know what I mean. A murder is investigated differently from a trivial, very minor crime. That has always been the case, unless there are some aggravating factors. So if the person is particularly vulnerable, or for any other reason, the officer has discretion. We have always called investigations to a conclusion when there is no likelihood of a positive outcome if we carry on. That is what we do. That's how policing works. It's always worked like that. It continues to work like this. That this policy is simply to write it down and to help our officers to be consistent and to help them to understand that they have our support when they are saying this is time to stop. There is no reasonable, it cannot be right to invest further resources into this one where we are not going to get a positive outcome when over here we have a crime that we must deal with. So it's about dealing with the things that matter most. That's the way I would put it. And it is, again, of course, being done against the backdrop as I have described, of increasing demand and less resources. So I feel that it is right to give my officers the support to do this in this way.
The second part of the question about...
Antisocial behaviour. No, I think the issue here is we are absolutely committed to our dedicated ward officers solving problems. And they will look at, for example, crime patterns or, of course, antisocial behaviour, which is a huge issue for us that we want to deal with really effectively. And they continue to have discretion. And I would expect them, for example, if you have a vulnerable victim, if there is any repetition, I mean, that is one of the criteria. You will have seen, for example, perhaps if you read some of the coverage, if somebody is, there's a vehicle, and that vehicle has been known to be used in a dishonesty matter before, then absolutely the investigation must continue. So if there's a repetition, that's one of our factors. And I don't think this is in any way in conflict with the antisocial behaviour policy or what we wanted to achieve there. And absolutely I want the dedicated ward officers to be, this is partly about giving them more room to be proactive and work on those really awkward problems.
Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Tuvan.
Thank you very much. I've got a number of questions. Can we look at the performance issues that must be worrying in the sense of issues of underreporting as well? Much that we're increasing the emergency issues, this is only what we are being officially notified in some areas. And of course it does go back to 2015, but we on this committee have been raising the issues of trend in violent crime actually from 2013-14, when actually the Met would tell us, no, this is about recording issues, when actually, no, it was a real people being harmed. So the trend is there, it's getting worse. So you're suggesting that maybe one of the factors of why it's happening is the demographics, the younger population. Is that? And I think that's there. Is that the key factor, or is there other issues that's occurring out there that we need to understand better? Is there a national discussion going on? I know it's not just in London where there's rising crime, but what are your colleagues nationally talking about with yourselves?
Craig, to answer, there is a national discussion and we are constantly having it.
There is a national discussion to try and better understand it, and your analysis is right. And I think it's where, and you and I have had this conversation a number of times in this room, looking at violent crime as one bucket is actually quite hard to pick up trends, because there are a whole series of recording changes trends. I mean, some of yesterday's coverage touched on this issue where any break to the skin now is a grievous bodily harm. So if you sort of grab my arm and just nick me on the way out, that's grievous bodily harm. That's probably not what your average member of the public, if I stopped them outside, would think grievous bodily harm is. So there's been a load of those. You're absolutely right. The trend that started towards the end of sort of 13-14 was that knife crime injuries under 25, which is the proxy we've always looked at around knife crime. So we think there are a number of things there. There's something about, colleagues are talking about a propensity for some people to use violence, and particularly small groups of people at quite a violent level. And that's not confined to London. Colleagues in most major conurbations have seen that with those. It's also linked to some of the stuff we've seen with the corrosive substance types of attacks. We do know, and one of the research evidence around demographics is around, as the Commissioner said, this availability of young people as both, they are sadly the cohort that are both victims and offenders in that. So as your young population grows, there is a tendency to see violent crime as a bucket, as a cohort, move in that way. The reality is that we've asked for some research to try and get beneath, go on then, what are the factors driving the individual bits of it? Because that's where you need a different response. I mean, we'll touch later on some of the stuff around knife crime, but that's not the same thing as your normal sort of public centre violence where people come out of a pub and hit each other, or private violence around domestic abuse and assault in a home or in a personal environment. They each require a tailored response. So there's quite a lot going on underneath that.
Okay, thank you. If you could share that research with us, that would be useful. In terms of the police response, and, and of course, some of the issues in the media yesterday in the Evening Standard, one part of London was described as a crisis point. looking at some of these figures, there are crisis points and tipping points when you take a different form of action in terms of policing response. Knife crime being one of those, of the task force that you've set up. When is it, when does it become, in these crime categories, that something different has to be done, or something that was done before that we stopped doing and we're bringing it back? How are you making those assessments? Because from an ordinary member of the public's view, looking at the basic percentage changes, one would be wondering, and I do agree, it's a small minority of people committing these crimes, and generally might be safer. I'm not sure, Cress, whether I feel, is it because I'm getting older, I feel that in some parts they're less safer, or I feel more outraged by some of the things going on. I'm not sure around that. I need to check that myself. But in some of these issues, there clearly is a problem, isn't there? There is a problem with sexual crimes and sexual violence crimes of those. We can't not get away with that.
Yeah.
I think we're at a tipping point and a crisis point. So tell us about the response that you do and making a judgment of when these categories year on year become that tipping point for trying something new. Is it media outrage? Is it Sophie Linden and the Mayor saying, come on, pull your socks up? What's the internal mechanism inside for you to say, actually, more of the same is not working here and we need to do something different?
Well, that's a great question. I think historically there has been a risk that we, if you like, chase the football. And I know we've been accused of that sometimes in the Met, where we've seen a problem bubbling and we've all charged across with enormous weight of resource, gone in, tried to do something, come away again, next thing, next thing, next thing. And what we are trying to do in the overall approach is genuinely to learn from all the best practice, to open ourselves up to what's going on elsewhere, internationally and nationally, to really understand what works, and to try to get more and more into prevention so that we aren't chasing around. Our job and my job to try, yes, to listen to what the public are saying, and some of that is mediated through the media, absolutely to listen to what our democratically elected representatives of various sorts, and of course the Deputy Mayor in this instance, are saying about what they think are, is really causing people of concern, because they have different networks and different ways of understanding things from us. And I spend a lot of time talking to my people, and not least to the people who have been around for a while. And if you take moped-enabled crime, which I know we're going to, as an example, when I arrived back in, I was really shocked at what was happening. And I felt and feel that that needed a new major effort to bear down on it. And we'll be talking about that. And that was because it had gone from, relatively low levels to an enormous increase in less than a year. And was causing concern, obviously, amongst officers feeling, that this is just not right, and the public feeling that the police were not responding well enough to something which has the feeling of sort of anarchy about it. So that's a case study. I just walked in and said, this can't be allowed to go on in this way. Now, obviously, as soon as I do that, I'm taking resource from elsewhere. I get that. And it's a balance. But the Deputy Mayor, of course, has, the Mayor sets the budget and overall, and the overall strategy, and we've got the police and crime plan. I'm comfortable with it, but that shows the sorts of things that I should be more or less interested in.
Okay, and as you said, shifting resources around to respond to those issues and the various crises we face. Right. In terms of, I was looking at the recording figures and looking at the sanction detection rates, which I know is a bit old-fashioned, but that's what we judge your performance on. And I really struggled to see whether Mopac were publishing any, or on the GLA data store, whether you'd published any. I think you published them for the last year-on-year figures. We don't seem to have them this year for some reason. We do have them for dog attacks, and we do have them for gun crime, which may say something in itself. But in terms of sanction detection rates, if they're not the way I should be judging your performance in terms of tackling this the new challenge of rising crime, then what should I be judging your performance on then?
Well, I do think sanction detections are part of it.
Yeah.
I do. certainly for my internal management, if you like. I do keep an eye on that, and I do want to know about sanction detections. However, increasingly, in, for example, areas like domestic violence, we completely recognise, and more than recognise, I mean, I believe passionately that sanction detections is not a particularly helpful way of looking at how we're doing in relation to that crime. What is helpful is what are we doing that prevents people being harmed or reduces the harm they come to. So that is things like repeat offending. That's about understanding what's happening to repeat offenders and indeed to repeat victims. It's about the quality of service. There's a whole range of things there. And often an out-of-court way of dealing with it, the problem solving I was talking about with the dedicated ward officers, won't involve a sanction detection, and that's true in lots of ways. So I think you should be looking, and the Police and Crime Plan says this, in some areas at the overall crime figures, and you should hold us to account for that, albeit we work in an extremely complex, as you know very well then, sociological environment, which doesn't necessarily mean the police are doing badly if crime goes up, but you have to ask us questions about that and try to understand it. You
And I think you're right to do that. You're the number one agency in tackling crime, but you work with partners and you cannot be responsible for completely the piece.
No.
I understand that.
Yeah.
The bit we're focusing on, I think, are the two issues. The one issue you've raised with me as prevention, and we'll come on to that, but the issue of deterrence doesn't seem... the fear of, no, fear's the wrong word. The fear of being caught about some of this behaviour that we're seeing in the recorded crime is not a deterrent anymore. And police officers, or as in the police service, is struggling with that deterrent. That actually the people that commit harm or commit these crimes are taking it on the chin if they happen to be caught or not, or likely to be caught. And then I think we go back to sanction detections. So is it right for us to expect, this committee, that we're going to see something, one, that you're going to publish the sanction detection rates behind all these crimes, as you've done in the past?
They're certainly not secret.
Well, they're not secret, but they're difficult to find.
I think they're published.
I couldn't find, I struggled yesterday to find, if
Well,
that's
get them
it.
for you.
Secondly, that we see a new way of judging that performance in the rounds, the sanction detection rates, that if we could have something that we could make sense of in the future about the range of issues, it might be something that we need to pick up on. If I just move on to the issues of yesterday and the clarity advice around it, and like you said, it's not new about those issues and screening out crime, and for a number of years I think colleagues in the Conservative group have raised issues about screening out of crime. I have always worried about mixed messages and what it means down for the people making the discretion. What does it mean when your boss says X, and do I do it literally or do I not? So I go back to the issue where I witnessed a police officer once telling a group of residents, we only do the basket of 10 crimes and nothing else, which could be further from the truth, but that's what happens. The communication internally in the Met is not as great. And I do think the intervention yesterday, that was much needed in terms of the issue, I accept that, I thought was a bit clumsy. I do think it's time for the police to have an honest conversation with the residents, not just with the establishment, politicians, media. I mean, we use the media in that way to explain now what is going on. Because, like you said, it goes back to recording crime, it goes back to the prevention issue. We've got a stretched police service, and actually you're not telling them that you're not going to do those crimes, but actually you're going to put into clarity about what happens and when. And if that is the case, the trouble is, mistakes get made. I've been in situations where violent crime has been screened out when actually the borough commander has screened it back in. And I think we shouldn't be screening out harm crime, which is the system, do you know what I mean? And where people are taking those judgments, and with the new way that response are working with caseloads, there is a tendency, if that supervision isn't right, and the advice isn't right to some of our youngest and most inexperienced officers, about some of those crimes, then we're going to miss the point. I come from a view that people that do commit some of that low-level crime go on to commit other crimes. And if they feel they can get away with it, they will. They will graduate up, and therefore it's quite important. I can't think of anything more intrusive of being burgled and having someone go through my personal things. Do you know what I mean? If that happened, and you know, there's all sorts of issues around that. All too often, people will say, well, actually, are the police working the extra mile? How do you demonstrate that? Or are you actually, no, this is a no-brainer, it's out? And how do you get that, you know, someone who's worked on coming to the end of their shift, talking to a member of the public, a bit tired, may have had a difficult and challenging shift, as you do, of where they're just going to say, actually, no, it's not going to happen. The victim doesn't really want to hear that. How do we actually instill some of that interaction with the public, where if we carry on, and I do think it was a clumsy intervention yesterday, where we'll lose the confidence of people that we shouldn't be losing confidence of.
Lots of things there. Very briefly, confidence in the police is high. It's gone on being high. There are some strands of confidence which we're working very hard on, but confidence in the police is high, and I'm absolutely convinced that it will remain high. And actually, what we have seen this year is an outpouring of understanding of the police, interest in the police, care for the police, wanting to help the police. And I'm looking, as you know, just as an aside, to mobilise people and communities to help them to protect themselves more and to help them to help the police more. And I think we can maximise some of this. Out of all that ghastliness this year, there are some good things, and we can maximise that. And I think we will continue to. And it's certainly, when I talk to my people, I say public confidence is our number one thing. Within that, it's being competent and dealing with violence effectively. So I would be really, really worried if I thought this will have a long-term impact on public confidence. In terms of deterrence, I think that's an interesting point, Len. I'd love to debate that with you and others elsewhere longer. I suppose people have always said what you've said, roughly speaking, which is, some people don't respect the law. Most people are fearful of being caught. Most people do respect the law. And that absolutely goes for young people as much as anyone else. However, I mean, it's a great achievement. As you know, we now have a hugely reduced population of young people in custody. We're all really pleased by that. And all sorts of other interventions are being taken. However, when you look at the victims of personal robbery, for example, and the offenders, the moped-enabled crime, you're talking a lot about very young people. And I think there is a very legitimate question to ask about whether we are collectively, the whole system, doing the right thing, the right balance of leading people away from crime and also making sure that people feel deterred before they even start. And it's a complex issue. You talked about repetition, and that's my key point. You know, if somebody is a repeat offender, they'll be being dealt with. If there is a series of crimes, that will be absolutely dealt with as much as it possibly can. If somebody is repeatedly victimised, antisocial behaviour, domestic violence, that also is a high priority. So I'm sorry if you think it was dealt with clumsily. I'm convinced it's right. And the reason I think it's right is because, as you say, we need to be honest. And we need to be honest at all levels, and we need to be open. What we are describing is not very different from what we've always done, as I've said. And secondly, none of it, I think, I know it's got headlines, but I don't think that any of it should be alarming to people. I don't want it to be. Now, you say that was a clumsy way that it came out. Absolutely, I do want my frontline people to fully understand it. As you say, mistakes will be made. They will have been being made over many years. That's kind of what happens when you've got 42,000 people. Some people don't quite hear exactly what was intended or use their discretion, which I still want them to have, masses of, in a way that when it's supervised, when the borough commander looks at it, you think, oh no, that's not quite right, because you didn't think of this or you didn't think of that. That's the way I want my service to work, that actually we allow people to get on with their jobs and we help them and train them as best we can, and we give them clear messages wherever we can. I also accept it's a big, sprawling, in some ways, organisation with lots of different specialisms and subgroups, and my very strong imperative is to improve the quality of communication across the organisation. And I want my officers to be reading the Evening Standard and hearing from me, and hearing from their supervisor, and thinking about these sorts of issues. And I'm out and about talking to them all the time. I'm out and about talking to the public all the time. And I think we can get fairly quickly to a place where this particular issue does not undermine people's confidence and where actually the officers understand what was expected.
Chair, the one last
Assembly Member
question.
Duval, I'm really sorry, I've got two more Assembly members trying to come in on this
Are we going
first
to get
question.
to see the, behind the blog, the assessment policy
Yeah.
that you're going to send to us? Or I presume Sophie has seen it?
I don't, unless there's some reason why we don't normally send you policy, I'm quite happy for members to see that. What I would say is that we are also, through, for example, our digital investigation, our telephone investigation, we're very clearly giving a better quality of service to people already, because they are not getting, you talked about the frontline officer, the response officer now carrying a caseload in places. These are officers who are, it's a change and it'll take a while to bed through, but they're officers who, every crime they go to where they're having to do more of an investigation themselves, I believe they're learning more and more about crime investigation in the way that, sorry, we're going to look really old here, we did for the first 15 years of our service or 20 years of our service. And they are not then saying, well, somebody will be along to help you with this or that or the other, which may be inaccurate, which can happen at the moment. I honestly think we're going to a better place, but it can be hard to explain.
Thank you. Assembly Member Sahid.
Yes, Commissioner, when I was sitting listening to you, I was reminded of the NHS. As a professional body, doctors are up and down making decisions all the time about patients, of when to pull the plug out, when not to investigate further. But this policy is not written down because we don't want to deprofessionalize our doctors and nurses. We want them to be able to justify in every single decision of why they're taking that action, rather than giving them a policy that you can hide behind under. Now, the important thing is the perception of the public and the perceptions of the victims in this policy, right? How are you monitoring the impact of these new assessment techniques? What are you doing to monitoring the impact of this? What are you doing to say to people to reassure them, right, that these officers will be doing exactly what you want them to do and not getting away with something which you should have done? I mean, I just draw parallels here, sitting as a doctor, right, of the judgments that I make every day, and I don't have any document to fall behind to protect, right? I need to justify every single decision I take in the context of that patient, and that's how I want to be seeing I think you may be deprofessionalising your officers at the front line rather than protecting them. I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that.
So I think that's an interesting subject area. I completely disagree with you. I'd love you to come and have a look. We are constantly looking at what happens in the NHS. We're constantly looking at how we professionalise whilst maintaining the professional discretion, how we give people guidance, authorised practice, a sense of what is right and not right. This is national policing as well as in the Met, and yet give them the room to make their own decisions. And I am absolutely clear that these are skilled, professional people who are faced with a particular situation. They must make their own decisions. This is not a prescriptive policy. This is actually, it's just not. It is not prescriptive. They can and will and should make their own decisions. And we in the police have at least 17 years of very strong history of having to justify every decision we make. So I can assure you that they will be accountable, because we are. That's how we do things, and we do. And sometimes it's very frustrating the degree to which we do it, as I know it is in the medical profession. We do write down why we have made the decisions we've made. So please come and have a look.
Thank you.
Member Prince, did you have a question?
Thank you, yes. Good morning. Just looking at public perception of the police, and it's good to note that there's been a very slight increase in most of the areas of public confidence in the police, which is a good thing. But the figures look as though they're being dragged down by two areas. One is informed local, and I personally have suffered from that, and also contact with ward officers. My question actually is to Sophie, if I may. In view of the Mayor's